Paul Craig Roberts is on the line with us today. And Paul, considering the conclusions of the Mueller report as interpreted by AG Barr, do you think this is likely to increase or decrease the ability of the government to push the Russian and Putin demonization mode? What do you think?
Well, it's certainly not helpful to their purpose, but the military security complex is a very powerful lobby group. It was so powerful in 1961 that President Eisenhower felt he had to warn us about it. That was a long time ago, so you can imagine how much more entrenched it is now. And Trump threatened this group severely when he said he was going to normalize relations with Russia, because you can't really justify a military security complex budget of $1,000 billion annually if you don't have a big enemy.
Yeah.
So if you normalize relations with Russia, you displace the enemy that's been created to take the place of the Soviet threat. Terrorism wasn't a big enough enemy to do that. And so I'm sure that they're going to hold on.
Yeah, well, you know, if we could
Russia, it also appeals to many of the liberals in the Democratic Party, and it appeals to many of the conservatives in the Republican Party. You know,
so in effect, then you see this as perhaps a little bit of a obstacle for them, but you think they still will prevail with their continuing campaign to demonize Russia and Putin?
Unless Trump and Barr conduct an investigation into the role of the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI in the attempted frame-up of Trump, this essentially was an act of sedition. And in fact, it would be severely punished. And also, it was a felony for the FBI to use the Steele report to obtain spy warrants and not make it clear to the FISA court that it was using political propaganda paid for by the Democratic Party.
You know, you mentioned a number of times before. You know, this is kind of ironic because Trump started out trying to normalize relations. Now, maybe his motives were impure, maybe it was to help his own business interests, but the effect of it would have been positive for both nations. And now, as you've mentioned a number of times in your other reports, what they did was they scared Trump into taking a harder line on Russia so he wouldn't be accused of this collusion that they've trapped him with.
Right.
So, you know, Trump isn't likely to change now. He's going to stay on the course of the demonization, isn't he?
I don't know. No reason for him to. The trouble is he's surrounded himself with the neoconservative warmongers like Bolton, who, as far as I can tell, is running his foreign policy. And he has gone along with the demonization of Venezuela and Maduro, and he's doing to Maduro exactly what the military security complex was doing to him. And now, of course, we have the Julian Assange case, which they claimed was tied in with Russia. They've now abandoned that, and the fake indictment of Assange simply claims that he was in a conspiracy with Manning to try to hack the computers. They don't even say that the hacking occurred. It just said it was a conspiracy to try to do something.
Yeah.
So it's fallen apart. I think Trump has said, Larry, that the effort to frame him up needed to be investigated. And Barr, the new attorney general, said something to the effect that he agreed with that.
Yeah, however, you know, during the campaign, he was singing the praises of WikiLeaks because they're publishing this dirt on Hillary and on the Democratic Party. Now, just yesterday, after the arrest of Assange, he was asked for comment. He said, "Well, really don't know anything about WikiLeaks." So, what does that presage about what direction he's going to take on this?
Well, for the president, they're not supposed to interfere in Justice Department cases. But if he had any integrity, he would simply issue a pretrial pardon. That's what George Herbert Walker Bush did for Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense, who was being charged as part of the Iran-Contra investigation. And President George Herbert Walker Bush simply issued a pretrial pardon and stopped the whole. So he could do this for Julian Assange. In fact, he should, because if you look at who's delighted at his arrest, it's Hillary Clinton.
Do you think he actually will do that? Issue a pardon?
I think he should do that, but the trouble with Trump is he never knew who to appoint who would help him do what he wanted to do. So he ended up with all the people opposed to his policies surrounding him.
The neocons.
Yeah, that's right. And warmongers. And so this makes it very difficult for him to function effectively as a president. So I think that Eisenhower was right, that the military security complex is a threat to accountable government, to democracy, and it has a huge budget. This budget depends on an enemy, and they're going to maintain that enemy.
This is a good point perhaps for you to give us a review of how the neocons took such precedence in the U.S. government. Now, you were a Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, and you point out that both Kennedy and Reagan strived to reduce tensions between the two nuclear powers, the U.S. and Russia. After the Bay of Pigs and the Kennedy assassination, however, and then after Reagan left office, it's all reverted to the way it was. Now, I guess that has something to do with Bush Sr. kept the neocons literally in the White House basement. Bush Jr. and others let them out, right? And since then, they have risen.
The neocons got into the Reagan administration because they were understood as anti-communist as opposed to the Soviet Union. And that's how they wormed their way into the conservative movement. They presented themselves as we're with you against the Soviet tyranny. A lot of the conservatives did not fall for that. I was on the committee for the President Danger, the original one, during the 70s and 80s. And they would not let the neocons be members. They regarded them with extreme suspicion and dislike. Now, I'm talking about the grand old men of American leadership, and former State Department secretaries, Treasury secretaries. They were the people who had held things together, during the 20th century. But somehow they wormed their way in. In the Reagan administration, they caused the Iran-Contra scandal. Reagan fired them all. They were investigated. Many of them were convicted, including high-ranking CIA officials, including Elliot Abrams, who Trump has brought back, who was at the time the Assistant Secretary of State. A lot of these people were convicted. Now, they were then pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush when he succeeded Reagan. And I think they were pardoned because they were seen as just people who went too far in combating communist influence. The Contras were seen to be against the Sandinistas, who were represented as communists.
Mm-hmm.
And Reagan was told, how are you going to end the Cold War with the Soviets if they continue to have successes in our sphere of influence?
Right.
If the Sandinistas take over down there, we have a communist advance, and the Soviets are going to feel like they're winning, and you're not going to be able. So they were taking advantage of Reagan's interest in ending the Cold War, which is really what he wanted to do. He wanted to end it. And so
didn't want to win it, wanted to end it.
Yeah, that's how all that got going, and that's how they got in there. But you know, people say Reagan knew and all this. I don't think he knew. I didn't know anything about it. Yeah. And I was in the committee for the present danger. So on the whole, they were wiped out. And George Herbert Walker Bush kept to Reagan's policies toward the Soviet Union. And they gave Gorbachev the guarantee that if he let Germany reunite, NATO would not move 1 inch to the east. Well, it was Clinton who started all the destruction of the agreements that Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush had made with Gorbachev. So Clinton was the first one that moved NATO into the territories which the United States government said would not be moved. And then we got George W. Bush. Basically, it was the Cheney administration. I mean, Bush was kind of a front man, but he didn't make the decisions. Where they started pulling out of the arms control agreements that went all the way back to Nixon. You know, George W. Bush pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty and said, okay, now we're going to build Star Wars after all. Mm-hmm. And this was a direct threat to the stability of the nuclear weapons, the agreements that had been made. So you weren't supposed to be able to have an offensive capability. There was something that was simply to deter the other side from using them. So that was the first thing. And then we just went on from there. And now we've pulled out of the INF Treaty. And we revised our nuclear war doctrine. During the Reagan era, nuclear weapons were only used in retaliation. There was no first use. And now they are first use, first strike. This is very threatening, very destabilizing. So all this began with Clinton and has consistently gone through, from Clinton to George W. Bush to Obama, who was one of the worst, and now to Trump. So the recklessness of these policies are extreme because as those of us who lived through the Cold War and many of the remaining Soviet experts like Stephen Cohen, we've never seen such high-level tensions between the United States and Russia. This is the most dangerous point in my life. I've never seen anything like it. The Cold War was very tame compared to these wild accusations, these irresponsible policies. All of this effort to gain some sort of military advantage over Russia, this is just madness. And the neoconservatives are behind it.
And the danger of this is largely being unreported by the mainstream media. Most of the reporters, either they're on board with the party line, the way I see it, or they're really ignorant of the real danger.
Well, as a former Wall Street Journal editor and columnist, Businessweek columnist, Scripps Harvard News Service columnist, and creators, syndicate columnists, I'd like to make it very clear the United States does not have a media, except on the internet. The print and TV media and NPR, this is not media. These are two-bit punk shills who are a propaganda service for the establishment. And that's all they do. They're incapable of reporting anything accurately. And I can't think of anything they have reported accurately.
So considering their influence and their predominance of information to the public, where do you see all this going, Paul?
Well, I think they've lost their credibility. And I don't think anyone believes them. This is why I think the internet flourishes, and this is why they support the government's attack on Julian Assange. They want to get rid of real journalists because they're all a bunch of whores. That's all they are. They're not. They're despicable people.
But they're also shutting down the internet now.
Well, they're
censoring
trying.
The internet.
They're trying to.
So, considering that, where is it all going?
If they, well, then we'll have a dystopia in which truth is dead. This is an attack on truth. You can't have any freedom if you can't have truth. And so the attack on truth, which is what they're doing, that's what the attack on Julian Assange is. It's an attack on truth. They're trying to criminalize the First Amendment. Basically, that's what this is. This is an effort to criminalize the First Amendment. Now, who's behind it? It's the security forces. The CIA is behind it. They're the ones who were really hurt by the various WikiLeaks releases. It showed how they operate against our own allies, or our allegedly allies, who are basically just puppet states. So they're behind it. And of course, Hillary's delighted because she blames Assange for the email release, which she thinks caused her to lose the election, but which I don't think had anything to do with the election.
All right, Paul, one last question. Considering all the input that the neocons and the conservatives, the hidden government, the military-industrial complex have, all the weight that they have, all the persuasive power that they have. Once again, are you hopeful that anything will change, or pessimistic about it?
I can answer that question better once we see if Trump actually investigates the security services to find out who was behind this Russiagate hoax. It was clearly a hoax, and nobody believed it. Nobody could possibly be stupid enough to believe something like that. And clearly, John Brennan couldn't have believed it. Comey couldn't have believed it. Mueller couldn't have believed it because they organized it. And not even the Democratic Party is stupid enough to be able to believe it. This Adam Schiff, these people, they can't be that dumb. It's really not possible. So it was a technique basically to stop Trump from normalizing relations with Russia, and thereby putting the military security complex budget up for grabs, or some large part of it. And it was an effort of the Democrats to get rid of the guy they hated because they didn't get Hillary in. Well, if this is investigated, then we have here finally what President John F. Kennedy said he was going to do. He told his brother Bobby, who was Attorney General, that as soon as I'm reelected, we're going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind.
And soon after that, he was assassinated.
And they knew that, and they killed him. So if Trump now actually brings some light into these dark areas of black ops and all of this uncontrolled budget, no one even knows where all the financing comes from. I would be hopeful that finally there's a move back against the deep state that has so much power and influence. And I think Trump should also follow through in his criticisms of the media. One of the reasons we don't have a media is that it was concentrated during the Clinton administration in the hands of 6 mega companies.
Yeah.
So it destroyed any independence in the media. There never was all that much, but it was dispersed and independent, and it was possible to have alternative voices, alternative explanations in the media. But once 90% of it, Larry, was concentrated during the Clinton years in the hands of 6 mega companies. So all journalism independence disappeared. You can't go against corporate interests. You can't go against government interests. And so a journalist basically has to function as a shield for the establishment. You know, whatever the official line is, they have to advance it. And that's what journalism has come to. So Trump should step in and use the antitrust laws and bust up those companies.
So are you cautiously optimistic, or are you pretty much pessimistic?
Well, it's like I say, Larry, if these two things happen, I would be optimistic. If they don't happen, then my view is they're going to keep on provoking the Russians so one day we don't wake up.
Yeah. All right. Paul Craig Roberts, thanks very much.
And wait on us to produce a situation in which they don't have the initiative.
Yeah. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you very much for your insights, and talk to you again soon, I hope. Thank you.
Okay, Larry. So long.
Bye now.